You're listening to the winning literary show, Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio, live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spiral, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
Let's go. Sometimes later becomes never. Do it now. My grandfather told me that. He was in his, oh my gosh, he was in his 80s. And I told him there was something I wanted to do, and I was working on it. It's my writing, my novel writing. It's what I want to do full time. And he's like, do it now. He said that when you get older, your energy, everything can change, and your mind is still sharp, but maybe your body's like, well, wait a minute. So sometimes later becomes never for maybe different reasons. Something changes in your life, and you can't see it coming. And it's something you want to do. So do it now, and that quote is anonymous. But I'm sure there are many people who have given people that advice. We are waiting for our guest to join us this morning. And so I'm going to kick it off anyway. One thing I've learned, if you are one of our loyal listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you. If it's your first time tuning into the show, thank you, thank you, thank you. But if you've listened to Off the Shelf, we've been on for 17 years. If you've been listening to Off the Shelf, you know I always say you got to be flexible, you got to know how to pivot, and no matter what happens, you got to be ready to keep it moving forward because things happen in all of our lives. If you do a TV show, a radio show, like TV, they probably have other standby guests because you get ready to go on the air. What if somebody who's supposed to be there, they're in an accident, they fell sick, they had an emergency in their family, that second guest is coming on, and the audience never even knows they went to first on deck. You got to always be prepared in life just to keep moving with a real smooth flow. So I want to ask you, as I often ask you, we're coming up on the holiday season. It is December the 7th. You guys, in less than 20 days, for those who celebrate Christmas, Kwanzaa, and I'm trying to remember when Hanukkah is. All these winter holidays, we're right in it. We're right in it. There's not like a lot of more time to prepare for it. So if you're looking for gifts for yourself, and I think there's no better gift than a book. You're looking for a gift for yourself, or you're looking for a gift for someone else. If you love mystery and suspense, but not just mystery and suspense, you also value relationships. There is an amazing, this is a real love story. And this couple meets in college in Pennsylvania, and they are really supposed to be together. But one of them grew up, he's raised by, his father suffered from alcoholism. And it impacts Raymond. Raymond is a track and field. We just had the Olympics. Raymond with a gold medal at the Olympics in middle distance, no doubt about it. And he's academic, very talented, so in both. And he gets a full scholarship. And that's where he meets his soulmate, Brenda. And her background is different from his. She's grown up with more what some people might call privilege, but she's grown up in the South, and Raymond grows up in Ohio. In the Midwest, and oh my goodness, they do belong together. But now you got to deal with all the baggage that you from your childhood programming. But there are these 5 friends. Raymond has 4 friends. These guys are friends for life. These dudes are, and it's rare that I find a story about like even women or men who are like these tight friends. And in there is a murder mystery tucked in the story. So if you like suspense and romance and love and a real depth to a relationship, I encourage you to get Love Pour Over Me. It's an ebook and print, and I'm trying to think if it's in hardback as well. You can get it any retailer online. You can also get it offline. You get it at the library. If you don't see it at the store, the local independent bookstores as well where you live. Just ask the store clerk to order a copy for you. They can get a copy because it's carried by the largest book distributors as well. And again, as Love Pour Over Me. Who doesn't want that? Love Pour Over Me. Don't you want love to pour over you? Love Pour Over Me by Denise Turney. And now we're going to introduce you to today's special off-the-shelf guest. And today's guest is Polly Holyoke. And if I pronounce her last name incorrectly, I hope she corrects me. She is a former social studies teacher, and she has loved reading books since she was a child. She wrote her first book, 2 Days at Eagle Pass Ranch, with her friend when she was in the 5th grade. That's the same 10 when I started writing. In addition to reading and writing, Polly grew up hiking, skiing, and camping in the Colorado mountains. She also loves scuba diving. She's an outdoors person, y'all. She loves scuba diving, a water activity her husband introduced her to. And she's, like I said, she's a true outdoor enthusiast. She has climbed 48 of the 53 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. Wow. Polly is also the award-winning Neptune Triology and the acclaimed Skyriders series author. And please check Polly Holyoke out online. It is PollyHolyoke.com, PollyHolyoke.com, PollyHolyoke.com. We are just so excited and honored to have Holly with us here on Off the Shelf Books this morning. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Polly.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
And we're so excited to have you here with us this morning. I enjoyed, as I do with all of our guests, I really enjoyed researching and preparing for your interview today. I learned so much about the authors when I'm getting ready for the shows. But the first few questions I'm going to ask you, I ask every guest just to give our listeners a little backstory on the authors before I start talking about their stories. So to kick off this morning's show, Polly, can you tell off-the-shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
Well, I grew up in Colorado, so I am definitely came by my outdoorsiness sort of naturally and organically, so to speak. My father was a mountain climber. He was a doctor, but he was also a mountain climber, and so hiking was just part of our weekend deal. And then my parents very sadly split when I was in 7th grade, and then you have that typical divorce agreement where the kid goes back and forth on weekends. And so every other weekend I had with my father, we started climbing mountains and doing camping, and so I saw even more of the great outdoors, and I really enjoyed my dad, so those are some of my favorite memories. Also, Colorado's just a place with an outdoor lifestyle. I have lived in Texas, which was very good for my career, and people were lovely there, but it's much more of an indoor lifestyle, and I'm very happy I moved back to Colorado 3 years ago, so I'm back to skiing and camping and hiking and doing all those things.
What city, Denver, what city in Colorado did you?
Originally,
I always think Denver whenever.
And then actually, after the parents split, my mother moved to Aspen before it was a really fancy place. So I remember Aspen when there were cute little Victorian houses that people were still fixing up. Unfortunately, Aspen has really become, the billionaires have pushed out the millionaires. And so it's almost a ghost town now because a lot of those houses are third homes or fourth homes for folks. It's still a really beautiful place with a great ski mountain, but I live in Steamboat Springs, which is much more of a real town with real people and real schools, and I really, really love it here.
Yeah, you know what is interesting when you said that about Aspen? I saw a show, I forget what it wasn't about Aspen. It was something that had happened there decades ago, but they were saying just what you said. People don't realize it. Like people say Austin, Texas, you go way, way, way back. They said it was nothing like what it is now, but it was like a small town. I'm thinking of Newtown, Pennsylvania. It probably was like that with these quaint shops and these towns, and then they said it just took over. The wealthy just came in and it just took over this area. There are different parts that you see that Harlem is another area some people say is changing, where you see people with money coming in, and it just changes the dynamic of the area. So now, when you were a young girl, what did you dream of being, Polly, when you grew up? What did you want to become when you grew up?
Well, I have always loved animals. So my great dream when I was a kiddo was I wanted to be a veterinarian. And that was what I was really thinking I would be. And then I was fortunate enough the high school that I went to had a work program. And on Wednesdays, we actually went out into the community and had the chance to experience different jobs. And so it was in Washington, D.C. area. So on junior year, I worked in Capitol Hill and realized I really wanted nothing to do with politics. And then senior year, I got to work in a vet's office. And I loved being with the animals, but veterinarians have to spend a lot of their afternoons doing surgery. And a lot of that surgery is making sure that animals can't make babies. And so there's a lot of sterilization that goes on, and there's a lot of sewing. And, I don't really like sewing that much. So at the end of my internship that senior year, I realized that being a vet was not for me. So I decided to be a teacher instead, and that was a wonderful fit and something that I still get to do on and off now as an author. But I do think it's very useful for young people to figure out what they don't want to do, along with what they do want to do. And vet school is hard enough and so expensive now. I am so fortunate that I figured out early on that I really probably did not want to be a veterinarian.
You make a great point, and this is where you have to take advantage of an internship. We spend so much of our lives at work, and I feel like I'm thinking back to my grandparents and my parents. Back then, my parents, a woman really rarely worked outside the home, but I think back to those times, and I remember my elders telling me, do something you love because you're going to spend so much time at work. And I tell you, that was before the Internet, and when they worked, we spent even more time at work. It's this constant connection you could have from your cell phone to your laptop. You can be attached to work almost 24/7 now, where before you went in the office and when you came home, you were home. It was pretty much it. It's really changed. So it is even more important to find out what you like and don't like. You said you loved animals, and then you go in and you learn about what veterinarians really do, and you're like, nah, that's not for me. And I've had other people say the same thing. That is so, so, so important. Who or what experience inspired your love for not just reading but writing books?
I think that it probably started with a grandmother I had who used to come see us, again, growing up in Colorado, so she would come from Nebraska. And I was almost the youngest of all the cousins, so I was the youngest grandchild. And so she'd gotten quite frail by the time I came along. But she still was just such a fun, peppy lady. And she would sit on the couch because she, had osteoporosis. My dad hugged her at the airport and broke 2 of her ribs once. So she couldn't move around a whole lot, but she loved to read. And so she would read great, big, thick books to me. She read the Jungle Book to me. She read Black Beauty to me. And looking back, those are really big books. And then, I would act out all the parts running around on the floor. But I just couldn't wait for her to finish a meal and put on her reading glasses, and then she would transport me into this other world. And I think she must have been very good at reading, too, because those stories are still so real and vivid to me. And they're not particularly easy reads. So that was part of it. And then writing, I had this wonderful experience with my best friend, Lori, who is actually still one of my best friends. And her family had a ranch near Kremlin, Colorado. And the first time we went to this ranch for a sleepover, I was in 5th grade, and it was all cold and snowy at the ranch. It was actually in January. And it was just this magical experience. They let us, the parents said, go play in the hay barn. So there was this hay barn where there were stacks of hay bales with little trails between them and ladders and trapdoors. We thought it was there to play hide and go seek. I think it was probably there to store hay. But that was wonderful. They let us ride snowmobiles. And again, we're in 5th grade, so we're about 10, 11 years old. Snowmobiles are fast and they're powerful. We kept getting them stuck, but it was still very fun. And then another thing they let us do was ride the horses bareback in the snow. That's kind of fun because if you fall off the horse, you land in a snowdrift, and it doesn't hurt. The one thing they said to be careful about were the breeding bulls. Those are the big male dad cows. They have them in special pens, and they can be kind of grumpy. We snuck up to up to those corrals a couple times and waved at them and tried to get us to charge us, which they never did, but we thought it was really cool and really dangerous. So we got to school. Our little private school in Denver had study hall in the middle of the day, and that is waste. That is a total waste for 5th and 6th graders. Nobody I know at that age really gets their homework done. But for 2 weeks, I think we used study hall pretty well. I said, Lori, let's write a book about your ranch, because it had just been such an incredible experience for me. And so we sat down, and every day at study hall, we wrote another 3 or 4 pages. We wrote until we got to about 57 pages, all handwritten. And so we took a lot of our adventures and we turned it into a story about 2 girls outsmarting bad guys who'd come to the family ranch to steal the prize quarter horses. And the funny thing is, again, all the stuff we'd done in our weekend showed up. So one of the bad guys in the story, they got him on the back of a snowmobile out in the hayfields, ran it over an irrigation ditch, so he fell off the back and got a concussion. And another bad guy, they kind of lost him in the hay barn where the girls knew all the ladders and the secret exits, and they locked him in there. And the very nasty bad guy, the leader, they tempted him, they lured him into the bullpen and got him trampled by the breeding bulls. So what we really did was write Home Alone, because that's really a story of a little boy, beating up on the burglars and beating the burglars. Well, we wrote Home Alone Goes to the Ranch, and we had so much fun, we couldn't wait to get to study hall. And that's when I realized that when you write stories, if you have a vivid imagination, as I seem to, and as I think a lot of writers do, and a lot of kids do, it's like you get to live the adventures yourself. And so now I've figured out a way to turn my daydreaming into a job that I get paid for. So that's really wonderful for me.
Yes. Have you ever thought about revisiting this story, 2 Days at Eagle Pass Ranch, and actually whether you do it solo, get your friend's permission to incorporate her part of the story in and write it as a solo author or revisit it with your friend? Have you ever thought about revisiting it as an adult now and publishing it? Maybe you publish it for middle schoolers. Has that idea ever come to you?
I think it's on my list. There are just so many books that are kind of knocking on the door, but I think that's the second to next book that I might try to write, because every time, I start to explain it, I use this story when I go to schools. One of the great joys in my life is, again, I was a teacher, and now I get to go back into schools for a day. And I think it's just this kind of God-given opportunity to share my message. And my message is really kids need to read, they need to write, they need to unplug from their gadgets to leave time to daydream. Whether they want to be a scientist or a mathematician or a writer, we need more creative time. And I'm afraid all the cell phones and the iPads are stealing that from kids. But another part of my author assembly is I do talk about writing this story with my best friend. And it's just wonderful to see kids light up. And then I hear from teachers for months after I visit a school that they've got all these kids that are trying to write stories. To write books. And that's just the most wonderful thing that I get to do that. I'm at a stage in my life where it's like, how can I give back? And it makes me so sad that the kids are, so dialed into their games and into their iPads and into their TV. I have a friend who keeps arguing that video gaming actually can be creative, and I understand that there are some games where you get to kind of invent your adventures. Certainly D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, can be quite creative. I think some of those kids should write their own fantasy stories based on the D&D worlds that they build. But a lot of the stuff is not so creative, and I think it's very distracting from what you and I probably did when we were younger. If you had spare time, you sat there and you made up adventures in your head. And usually I took a book that I loved, and then I imagined myself into the story. And somehow I usually ended up being the hero and the star.
Oh, yes. Even with artificial intelligence, there's a lot of good. It can reduce errors, particularly for things in the more manufacturing corporate environments. But are people going to continue to really use their brains as much? There will always be inventors. There will always be scientists. There will always be people who be researchers and be curious and creative. But will that expand across the masses? And if it doesn't, what will we see in another 50, 70 years? It will be interesting, and I do encourage, exploring and creativity. It's a great way to express what's going on inside of you, too. So now we're going to start getting to these books. What drew you to horses? Was it the time at the ranch? But particularly the Pegasus. When I think about the Pegasus myth, what drew you to horses?
So
particularly as it relates to the Pegasus myth.
Yes. Okay. So we've established that I definitely was an outdoorsy and a horsey kind of kid. I think that there's just a special relationship between girls and horses. With perspective, I see I was so privileged to be able to have that. But I think that there are a lot of kids from rural backgrounds that get to have, through 4-H programs and so forth, that they get to have very strong relationships with animals. I think that friendship between kids and animals, that's a whole really important theme in a lot of kids' books. I think kids need that feeling that there's a creature or a person who loves them, understands them, and accepts them unconditionally. So we're always going to have horse and dog books. That's part of it. But what you're really asking is about the Pegasus myth. So when I was a little kid, my parents gave me this beautiful, beautiful version of the Pegasus myth with these wonderful watercolor illustrations. And I read and reread that picture book a gazillion times. It was actually retold by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who actually told the myth. And it was just this beautiful book. But I kept thinking how lovely it would be to have a flying horse. And I think I probably daydreamed flying around on a flying horse. So during COVID, I needed to come up with another story idea. I had a pretty successful series with Disney about genetically engineered kids who have to go live in the ocean because climate change is out of control. That was very sciencey and very science fiction oriented. That series was called first book was called The Neptune Project. It was actually quite successful in terms of getting on state lists and being well received. So I needed to come up with something else, and I knew that I also really love fantasy. And for your listeners who are writers, I think it's terribly important to write the kind of book you want to read when you were a kid, you wanted to read, or that you still like to read. You can't go chase a market trend and write something in a genre that you don't enjoy because it's not going to be authentic and organic, and it's not going to work. So I love fantasy novels. I really wanted to try my hand at one, and I also used to teach Colorado history. And so in that, I became very aware of something called the Pony Express, which is very sad to me when I tell kids about this, how many kids have not heard about the American Pony Express. But, of course, we had this time period when, around 1860, we didn't have a train across the middle of the country. We didn't have a telegraph yet. And so it took 3 months to get the mail from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco because the ships had to go all the way around South America. And we didn't have a Panama Canal yet. So these businessmen decided to hire a bunch of young riders to ride day and night 80-mile shifts on 4 different horses each, handing off the mail like a relay baton. And they thought maybe they could cut down the time to get letters to San Francisco. And indeed they did. They could do it in about 11 days from Missouri, from St. Louis to San Francisco, which is kind of amazing. And it was just this very colorful little period. It only lasted 18 months, and then they strung the telegraph lines across, and then the Pony Express became redundant. And so I had always been interested in that, and I love the Pegasus myth, in which Pegasus and Bellerophon fight this terrible 3-headed monster called a chimera. And somehow, I think sometimes creative ideas when you mash 2 totally different ideas together. So I thought, what about a Pony Express with flying horses? What if you had young riders delivering the mail across a vast empire? It's so big, they have to use flying horses that fly really fast. And so that was kind of the original premise of the story is 2 totally different things, the American Pony Express and the Pegasus myth. Put them together, and that's what I came up with, Skyriders, which is a story of brave young couriers on their flying horses delivering the mail. And my heroine, Kai, loves her job. She loves her sky steed. She loves her Uncle Doug's, even though he's always pestering her to practice sky fighting. Well, everybody knows that's a waste of time because the chimera, which is the creature you would fight in sky fighting, that once ravaged their world, are long gone. Well, in the course of the story, we discover that chimera are not long gone. Uncle Doug's is terribly hurt fighting the first wave of chimera as they attack Prakal, and he makes Kai promise, with what we think might be his dying breath, that she will take his manual on ancient sky fighting tactics to the capital and convince people there to read this manual before it's too late, because in the hundreds of years since there have been chimera problems in Prakal, people have forgotten how to fight these monsters. And that's a pretty tall order for a shy girl with dyslexia from the borders of the empire and the fringes of the empire. So that's kind of her quest in the first book. It was just a ton of fun to write. Shy girl making a difference, being brave, and aerial battles. It was just a great book to write. Great fun.
Oh, my goodness. I was getting ready to ask you to give us a synopsis of Skyriders, and thank you for introducing us to the story. Can you tell us a little bit more about Cassandra? You call her Key. Oh, you said she's shy, but what more? You mentioned her uncle. What are her parents, she have any siblings, good friends, and exactly what are her superpowers? Now, the horse flies, so I'm now interested in, are these regular humans with these animals with superpowers? So give us a little bit more about her personality, her family background, and just what are her superpowers?
Okay, so I would say that she really has a lot of superpowers. I suppose the one thing that makes her different from other young riders or young sky fighters and Skyriders, she discovers that she can link and speak to all the sky steeds, any sky steed that she touches. And by the way, I call the Pegasus or the winged horses are called sky steeds in my story. She's very shy and doesn't trust easily. And that's kind of a sad thing, but it came out of the fact that she had to board during the weekdays at the school in the village because her dad had an orchard out in the foothills. So long a distance she couldn't go back and forth every day to go to school. So she had to stay in town, and the kids in town were really mean to her because you don't often see, because she has dyslexia, you don't often see that in fantasy novels. I think the big series that does it well is, of course, the Percy Jackson books. And in that, Percy Jackson actually definitely has dyslexia. But otherwise, you don't usually see those kind of learning differences. And my daughter had dysgraphia when she was younger, and it really made school hard for her. So I think fantasy can take some of these realistic everyday problems and let kids sort of see them being used or dealt with in a fantasy world. And I really wanted to do that and try and do that well. So Kai doesn't trust well because she was teased at school because reading was so hard for her. She doesn't have a lot of friends. She really, really loves her sky steed. And I guess the magical power or the thing that's special is in this world, if a sky steed accepts you as their rider, then you can communicate with your sky steed telepathically. That would be the scientific term. In a magic word, a lot of times it's mind speech. They can just understand each other. So usually one rider can understand just their sky steed. So the one thing that is very unusual about Kai, when she goes to the capital and she starts working with other sky steeds, she starts to realize that she can understand every sky steed that she touches. And that becomes more and more important as the story goes on, because by the end we're in this terrible battle between the sky steeds and the riders and the chimera, the waves of chimera that are coming in. And the fact that she can communicate with all these sky steeds really helps. She's kind of the communication center, and she ties everybody together and makes it much more important.
Oh, my gosh, you took like the little kind of outcast girl, and now she's like the hero. She's the one that the town needs to lean on. Now, how did Kai and almost Nara meet? What's their relationship like?
So I think I love these questions. You did a good job on your homework here. They met. She really wanted a sky steed. So in this world, the rich folks have been breeding over the years. They've made the horses bigger and bigger, so they're almost like chargers that would carry armored knights. And those big domesticated sky steeds are very valuable, and they fight with their noble riders on them in tournaments. Well, as the horses get bigger, the sky steeds get bigger, they actually get less agile in the air, and that becomes a real problem when the chimera return. Whereas Kai, because she doesn't have any money, but she desperately wants a sky steed, when she was only 11 years old, she goes up into the mountains and she tries to find a wild sky steed. The wild sky steeds are based on our present-day Mustangs, and the Mustangs tend to be a little bit smaller than domesticated horses because they don't have as much food out on the range. So as a species, the Mustangs are a little bit usually smaller than our mainstream horses or domesticated horses. So she spends a whole summer camping up in the mountains and trying to get close to wild sky steeds. And finally, Nara sees her, and he's very curious about her. And you find out more in the second book, by the way, which is called The Sky King and is out now. You find out more about these wild sky steeds, and you find out more about his story. But in terms of his personality, I really had fun making a lot of these sky steeds that are partnered with Skyriders different from their buddy, from their pal, from their rider. And so Nara is incredibly outgoing. He's comfortable wherever he goes. He loves talking to the big domesticated sky steeds. He loves meeting new sky steeds and new people. And that's sort of the opposite of Kai. And so at the beginning of the book, you hear him saying, you need a bigger herd of your own. I wish you'd build a herd of your own, because horses are very herd animals, and they're very comfortable in a group. They're very lonely if you just have one horse. You should feel sorry anytime you see one horse sitting in a field, because that's not a horse in its natural environment. They really love to be around other animals.
Interesting.
So I had a lot of fun with sort of the opposites, and that he's always trying to get her to be more outgoing. And I think that's important. Anytime somebody is writing a story, you need to think about what your character wants and what your character needs. And what she thinks she wants is just to become promoted. She wants to make more money as a Skyrider. She wants a sky courier. She wants to be a senior sky courier. And that's what she thinks will make her happy. But the underlying context is that she would definitely be happier and more content if she had more friends.
Interesting. Interesting. I love how, yes. Oh, my gosh. Now, did Uncle Doug's, did he raise Kai? I know he's passing away, and he make her make this promise. But did he raise her? If not, how did he support her in the story, Skyriders?
So at the beginning, he actually doesn't have a huge role in the story. He's just there at the beginning. And so what you find out is that her dad died 2 years earlier from a fever, and he really raised Kai. It turns out that the mom did not like this hard scrabble life in the foothills and an orchard. And so she actually leaves Kai when Kai is, young enough to remember her and be heartbroken when her mother just rides off with a peddler. But the mom and so now you'll find in kids' books a lot of times there's a tough background, even going back into fairy tales. If there's a happy mom and a dad, and if everybody is getting along beautifully, there's not nearly as much scope for a story. So it's a very sad thing, but I often tell kids when I'm helping coach them to write stories, you probably have to be really mean to your character if you're going to be an author. Because if you're not mean, there's not any story. So poor Kai is out of a pretty rough situation.
That's true, yep.
So Uncle Doug, you look at all the Disney things, there's always a dead parent in a Disney story. Or the parent's going to die because, again, that's one of the most terrifying things for a kid is to lose a parent. So anyway, yes. So she is almost taking care of Uncle Doug's as much as he's taking care of her at the start of this book. She has got a load. She's taking care of an orchard. She's taking care of her uncle. She's got a lot on her plate. She's a very capable young person.
Now, would you please give us an overview of the Sky King?
Well, so part of Kai's, it turns out that Kai discovers that she is the Nexara. She is the connector, and this is a sort of a legendary job, and everybody's sort of forgotten about it because, again, the last big battle with the Chimera happened 300 years earlier. So people forgot there was such a thing as a Nexara. But when the Chimera come again, part of the magic that links sky steeds and humans, that magic was forged 300 years earlier, so the sky steeds would help humans fight back the Chimera that were going to just destroy this whole continent and take all most of the life form, the larger life forms off of it. So this is a very important alliance that was forged, but it has changed over time. And human beings, have almost made the sky steeds almost into their captives, or they're certainly not their equals anymore. And originally in the alliance when the sky steeds agreed to join the human beings and bind with them, it was supposed to be an equal partnership. So by the second book, Kai is starting to realize that sky steeds are not treated fairly anymore. They are owned by human beings. That was never the plan, and In the second book, she goes, a lot of sky steeds and riders get killed at the end of the first book in a terrible battle. The Empire needs more sky steeds. And so her job becomes to go to the wild sky steed herds and the head of all of them, which is the Sky King, and try and convince him to let more of the wild, smaller sky steeds bind with young riders. So they have a chance of fighting the Chimera when they come again. And the Sky King himself is very bitter about how the relationship between humans and sky steeds has gone astray. And he does not want to, for the first, most of the book, he does not want to let his wild herds fight with humans against the Chimera because the relationship has deteriorated. So she becomes really an advocate for the sky steeds, and by the end, I don't want to give too much away, but by the end, she has found the original meeting place where sky steeds met as equals with human beings, and she makes sure that they get some more of their rights back. Another thing about dealing with grief, it sounds like a funny thing in a fantasy novel, but I do think that fantasy, when it's done well, can address just as many problems as contemporary fiction for kids. And so one of the things that's always bothered me about old fantasy novels like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, these kids go off and fight these terrible battles, and there's no cost. There's no trauma. I have two daughters that are social workers, so I hear a lot about trauma and how it impacts people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure in the second book that Kai's got some weight on her from the losses in the first book, and the Sky King helps her learn to face that grief and to share that grief, because she's still kind of a loner. You know, she thinks it's a weakness to show her grief, and the Sky King shows her that she needs to be with other people, with her herd, and share her grief. So that was a lot of fun. Sometimes I just say that the Sky King is like the origin story of the sky steed. You find out a lot about the wild herds and a lot about sort of the origin of this beautiful relationship between human beings and sky steeds.
Okay. Now the Chimera, you've if I'm saying it right, that you've mentioned these monsters. Can you describe what they look like and what are their powers? They sound like they're like real formidable foes. Are they huge, like 50 feet tall? Do they look like dragons? What are they like, and what are their powers?
So the original Chimera that Bellerophon fought in the Greek myth. So going back to the Greek myth, Bellerophon was a Greek hero who wanted to make a name and a reputation. The way you did that in ancient Greece, if you went and found yourself a terrible monster to kill. And so when Bellerophon was looking to make a rep for himself, the monster of the day was something called a chimera, and it was laying waste to Lycia. And that chimera had three heads: the head of a serpent, the head of a goat, and the head of a lion. And it was about the size of a dragon. It had leathery wings so it could fly, and that chimera could breathe fire. Now, I've always had sort of an issue with how would something that has feathers and wings fight something that breathes fire. To win. I think the thing that brings fire, the monster with the fire, is going to win. And so when I went to plot the Skyriders series, I decided that my chimera would have three heads: the head of a goat, called a blood goat in my book, and a sand dragon. These are all desert creatures, and a lion. But they would not breathe fire. So I didn't want them my Skyriders to have to say a spell or something that would save them from the fire. But I did make the serpent head incredibly poisonous. And part of that was I was bitten by a rattlesnake about 15 years ago when I was hiking in the Utah desert. So I know what it feels like to have a very strong neurotoxin in your body. Writers are always taking their adventures and then putting them into their books in one form or another. So this terrible chimera that I've created doesn't breathe fire, but it is incredibly fast, and it's always hungry. It was created to always be hungry, so it's always trying to kill things and always trying to eat things. And then, again, this one head is very poisonous. And size-wise, it's twice, if not three times, the size of the largest sky steed. So they're big, but I didn't want them to be too huge. They're fast, and I wanted to make it possible for 2 or 3 sky steeds to take one chimera. But as the book, one chimera. So the singular is a chimera, and then plural is chimerae. I get tripped up, and everybody else gets tripped up doing that, right? And so they have these battles. As the books proceed, we find out that the evil mage that is making the chimerae has made a couple of them that are really big, and that those are harder to fight. But your garden variety chimera in this story is twice the size of a sky steed with 3 heads and very hard to kill.
Wow, it sounds like it. Oh, my gosh. Can you, before we start talking about the Neptune Project, what time period, this is fantasy, but if in a person's mind that looks at, today's time, to what time period, how far in advance is this story set in compared to today's time?
So the way to kind of tell that a lot of times is just to look at the technology. So we would call this more of a medieval fantasy. There's not steam power yet. There's not gunpowder.
Oh, okay.
So it would be, it's definitely not Earth. It's just another reality, but it's in a pretty low-tech world. And so horses, flying horses, but, yeah, no electricity yet, no steam power. So a pretty basic technology in this world.
I was thinking in my mind total opposite. I'm going way far in the future. So I'm glad I asked you that. What age group are the books written for?
Okay, so this series is definitely a fantasy series for ages 8 to 12 is what the publisher says. But I'm finding that even junior high, which goes up into 7th and 8th grade, which would be more like 8 to 14. I have some 13 and 14-year-olds that seem to be really liking it, and I think it's because there's so much action and excitement. And, she's for this type of book, she's 13, okay. So that's an older protagonist. Kids like to read about kids that are older than themselves. They really don't like reading about kids that are younger than themselves. And so that's why, there's some 13 and 14-year-olds that are actually enjoying the series. But I would say it's definitely a little bit younger in its field than my Neptune books.
Okay. Now, can you please give us a brief synopsis of the Neptune Project?
So that was a wild book to write. I'm actually a social studies teacher. I don't have a strong science background, but then I dreamed up this idea of genetically engineered kids who have to go live in the ocean because climate change is out of control. And this book is definitely set 250 years in our future. What I was trying to do, and this was written, 15 years ago, so it's an older series, I really always cared about climate change. I had a science teacher in 6th grade who was very much aware of the fact that climate was changing and very much an environmentalist, and that really stuck. And so I just kept reading all this stuff about how the planet was heating up and what a big problem this would be. So I thought, I really want to put this into a book so kids can picture how different the world may be if we don't get off of fossil fuels and start making some better choices. So Neptune came out of my concern about climate change and genetic engineering. I don't think a lot of people realize the degree to which we have started mixing human DNA with animal DNA, right? And here's the weird connection. In science, if you put human and animal DNA together, it's called a chimera, because a chimera is 3 different creatures stuffed into the same body in the myth. And so when you're mixing animals and humans, and the reason we would do this, the good reason, is something like pigs. We're trying to get organs that we could put into human beings and have our bodies not reject them. So if you can grow a pig kidney or a pig heart that has some human DNA in it, it's less apt to be rejected by our bodies. So that's the good use for this. But the idea of putting animal and human DNA together is really, pretty shocking and scary in some ways. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. And then also, I just really needed to make money, and I've always been fascinated by the oceans because I grew up in Colorado. We don't have a lot of oceans in the middle part of the country. So all those came together in the Neptune Project. And the basic idea is the heroine, these kids don't know they're part of the secret Neptune Project. Genetic engineering has become totally illegal in this future. And so when the scientists realize the land is getting so hot and so dangerous, they decide maybe our species' only chance is if some of us go into the ocean. So they actually change their own kids before they're ever born. And that has to happen that way if you want the traits to be heritable, meaning if you want them to be another generation of Neptune kids and make Neptune babies, you have to change them so this happens before they're ever born, and it's part of their structure, their DNA structure. So the kids have this modification. When they turn 12 or 13, they start as land kids. They think they're land kids. They get a shot when they turn 13 or 14, and they're old enough to survive in the sea. and then they have to go into the ocean coming back because their lungs have been changed. So it's a pretty shocking transformation for these kids, especially the ones that have no idea that it's going to happen to them. Imagine if somebody said to you tomorrow, you've got to go live in the sea, and you're not coming back. So that leads to some good conflict between the kids and their parents, certainly between my heroine there and her mother, when she finds out that she's sort of been a science experiment bred by her mother to do this, but her mother really loves her. And so anyway, so the kid goes into the sea, and she's another very shy, quiet kind of a character, not really comfortable with the kids in town. And I like to show shy kids coming to the fore and becoming leaders. I also seem to like to choose girls as my heroines and show them leading by consensus.
Go girl.
I'm a big believer in that. Go girl, girl power, but also girls who listen to other people. And usually the boys in my stories sort of don't listen very well, but the girls listen to the other people in their group. There are always lots of boys in my stories. It makes me sad when they just put a girl on the cover, because then boys don't buy the book. There are very strong boys in the stories, and they're very heroic, and they make great things happen too, but usually it's the girl that gets everybody to work together to save the day.
Okay. Introduce us to Nair. Am I saying her name right? Introduce us to Nair. What age is she when she has to go live in the water?
So she's more like a late 13 into 14. I never exactly say her age because I did want that story to appeal to older readers.
Okay.
There's something called older middle grade. In publishing, they kind of need to know where to put your book in a bookstore. So there's middle grade, there's chapter books, and then there's young adult. But a lot of us who write for this 13 and 14-year-old age group really feel like there should be an older middle grade category because 7th and 8th graders want books with heroes and heroines their age. So she's more that age. Once again, she comes from a damaged family. The dad has disappeared. The mom is pretty distracted because she's a brilliant scientist and she's very much a part of this very dangerous secret Neptune project. And the brother just ran away or disappeared a couple years earlier. And so it's just her and her mom, and she and her mom don't get along terribly well, and her dolphins. And so her best friends and the creatures she relies on for her emotional support are the dolphins. And she's able to do that in part because she's a very strong telepath, meaning she can hear thoughts. And guess what? It turns out that the dolphins are telepathic. Who knew? And I had to come up with this because I just got to thinking, okay, these kids are going to go in the ocean. How are they going to be able to communicate with each other? It turns out our vocal cords need oxygen. They need air passing over them for me to be speaking right now into my little cell phone here. I couldn't do this underwater. And so I was like, how are these kids going to be able to talk in the ocean? So that's when I decided part of the genetic engineering that was going to go on with them is it would wake up our ability to speak mind to mind. Only she's got it before she ever gets the shot. And then the dolphins actually, in her little pod, the mother, a dolphin, can actually understand English. And that is not because we learned dolphin. It's because she was orphaned as a calf and raised with strong telepathic humans, and she learned human speech. And so it's amazing to have one dolphin who can really understand human beings really well. And by the end of it, you start understanding that a couple more of them have picked it up from their mom. Anyway, I had a lot of fun with sort of language and animals and animal intelligence when I was writing that series.
Yeah, I love your stories. Can you tell us, did Nair make an appearance in the Neptune Challenge? What is happening at the start of the Neptune Challenge?
So the whole first book is really the kids getting used to the ocean and going through this terrible transformation of, turning from a land kid into a sea kid. And then their journey in the first book is to get themselves from Southern California. They have to travel all the way up the coast to a colony that has been created for them around Vancouver, north of Vancouver, in the Broughton Archipelago. The ocean, we're not the top of the food chain when we're in the sea. So it's a very dangerous trip, in part because they have to deal with sharks and giant squid and jellyfish. It's also a dangerous trip because the Marine Guard, turns out that there's a terrible, the government of California has kind of gone off the rails and become very a dictatorship, essentially. And so the Marine Guard wants to catch these kids because telepaths are pretty handy creatures to have around in terms of telling if people are telling the truth. And they just want to control this project. They don't like the idea that there's a whole other civilization that could get started in the sea. So they're chased by the Marine Guard. So anyway, that's kind of the first book. Then in the second book, we find out that there's a boy who was traveling with them. I won't say his name. Turns out he's kind of a spy for an evil Dr. Frankenstein of the ocean. So when the project was founded, they had a whole group of scientists working on this, and they were trying to create kids that were as human as possible, with human values, and human, not too far out in terms of whatever DNA they got spliced into them. But this one scientist was really looking to make an incredibly strong humanoid that could survive in the sea, and he was not nearly as principled about caring whether these kids would be happy or not. So he goes off and he creates shark kids and octopus kids and kids with electric eel powers. And it was really fun to do this because as you start reading about all these wonderful creatures in the ocean, you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a kid who could shock people? Excuse me, or a kid with extra arms. And so this is what this terrible scientist has done. He's created a sort of a mutant group of kids. They're still human beings, right, and still young teens, but they have all these extra abilities. And the shark kids in particular are not very happy because they're very restless. They're always hungry. They always need to keep moving. And his son is kind of a spy who was in the first book, and these kids get captured basically by this evil scientist. So the second book is a lot about finding out about these other kids that he's created, some who want to be good human beings and aren't killers, and then some other kids that are just too much shark in them to become sort of civilized. And our hero, our anti-hero boy, is really trying to fight his violent impulses, and he's kind of the dark hero, and he's kind of the big crush. I still have kids. Excuse me, I got to stop for a second.
Oh, go right ahead. And then your books do sound so interesting. I love your imagination, as I'm sure your young readers enjoy your imagination. And each of your stories, even though part of the series, they sound like they could be a standalone book as well, which is good. So I also wanted to ask you, what have readers of the books been saying about the stories?
I just love this. I think I have to go get a cough drop. Can we stop for a second?
Absolutely, absolutely. You go ahead. We have the pleasure this morning of interviewing and hearing from author Polly Holyoke, and she is the author of the Neptune Triology, which is what we're talking about now. She's just an outdoors woman. She loves the outdoors, and that you can see that appreciation for the outdoors make appearances in her book series, the Neptune Triology and the Skyriders series, which we started off discussing. And I encourage you to visit Polly online at PollyHolyoke.com. Again, that's PollyHolyoke.com. She got her start. She's writing for kids, oddly enough, and I just thought of this, she's writing for readers who, around the age she was when she and her friend first wrote their first book, 2 Days at Eagle Pass Ranch, which she wrote with her friend in the 5th grade. So now here she is back writing for a similar age group today. So if Polly is back, and we thank her for being here with us today, if you are back, could you tell us what readers have been saying about the books? Okay, so we're going to wait for Polly to join us. So just one couple of things she did say, she talked about, I love the characters and that there has to be a good enough conflict. Something that happens to your characters that is not everything's not smooth and easy. You do need a lot of conflict in a story to maintain that interest, and you can hear it with Key, who she said, I believe, is dyslexic, and she's very, very shy, and that's from the Skyriders book series. And her father lives so far away. She's under the care of her Uncle Doug's, and then he's passing, and her mother has left. That's the Skyriders. But she grows on to become a hero. And then you see Nia, who's another shy kid in the Neptune series, and she goes on to come into. Excuse me?
And the conflict in the Neptune project really is between shy Nair, and then these boys who are used to leading it and sometimes don't want to listen to her. But eventually the group realizes that Nair knows a lot more about the ocean than the rest of them, and so they vote for her to become the leader, which is a really nice moment. But there's definitely a lot of conflict between, you just have to set up conflict between your characters. And I think in the Neptune, also these kids are from very different backgrounds. That also leads to their conflict. Thank you very much for covering for me. I just had COVID a week ago, and so.
Oh, bless you, bless you. Oh my God, bless you. No, understood. Don't you worry about it. We are coming down to like the last 4 to 5 minutes in the show, and I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions I was going to ask you anyway. But can you tell us what readers have been saying about the books?
So this is just so much fun for me. I still, and even though the Neptune Project is a series that's really 10 years old at this point, I get emails all the time from my fans for that series. I'm just starting to get more emails from Skyriders. But in the Neptune Project, I get emails like, I decided to become a marine biologist because I wrote the Neptune book. And I literally about 3 months ago got one from a girl who loved the Neptune Project, so she came to one of my writing workshops. She was only 9 years old. And I guess I told her that I thought her writing sample was remarkable for her age and that she should consider pursuing writing. Well, she sent me a podcast she had made or a blog she had made from her journalism class. So she kept going with her writing, and she said, "You are one of the reasons I'm becoming a journalist." And so I was like, wow. I have to admit, I don't remember, but I see so many, kids because I get to go to hundreds of schools. I'm closing in on 500 schools now because of my teaching background. And I love talking to kids and saying, think about writing. If you're a daydreaming kind of kid, we will always need people to write the stories, to write TV, to write the movies. I just read one on Goodreads last night from a girl that is 22 now, and she was just saying that Neptune Project was the first big book she ever read, and the first book that made her reading. She had some learning differences, and reading was really a chore for her, but the Neptune Project was just so exciting that she sat down and she read it, and then she pestered her dad into helping her buy the second book. And there's actually a third book in this series that I had to self-publish when Disney didn't buy that one. And that one's still selling really well. So there are kids that are still discovering the Neptune series. It has a little romance in there, which I think is what the 13 and 14-year-old girls really like about it. And then all this near-death. They almost die every other chapter. I purposely do write books that are very exciting because I'm aware of the fact that books today have to compete with video games and skateboarding and all these other things. And so I'm never going to win the Newbery, but I do write books that get kids turning pages. And I think that's so important today because the competition for books is pretty tough out there.
And I'm going to say you are going to win a Newbery one day. I don't say that. We have about a little under 3 minutes, 2 minutes now. Can you quickly share 3 to 4 steps, or let me say 2 to 3 steps, that you found to be effective at getting the word out about your books?
Well, children's fiction is a little bit different from adult fiction. In kids' fiction, what's terribly important are librarians are the gatekeepers. I'm sorry, not the gatekeepers. And so you need to reach school librarians. Your publisher will do this through sending your book out for reviews from places like School Library Journal and Book List, and that's kind of beyond your reach as the author. There's not much you can do about that. What you can do is make yourself available to state librarians. If you make a state list, then a lot of schools in that state will buy your book. And librarians are really the ones who tell kids what are cool books and get the word of mouth going. So I think it's very important to be in touch with your state librarians and try to go to their state conferences and be available. If you are comfortable working with kids, be available to go on school visits. And so that's worked really well for me.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Where can off-the-shelf listeners get a copy of your books?
So they are all available. If you call ahead, every indie bookstore and Barnes & Noble can get you these books if you call ahead. They will probably not be on the shelf, but you can order them through your local indie or you can order them through Barnes & Noble. Don't order them through Amazon because Jeff Bezos has enough money already.
Okay, so we have, what a delight, what a delight. Polly Holyoke, author Polly Holyoke, she started writing her first book, you guys, she was in, and ladies, when she was in the 5th grade. She is the author of the Neptune Triology and the Skyriders series. Please visit Polly online at POLLYHOLYOKE.com. Thank you so much, Polly, for taking time out of your day to be here with us and our listeners here on Off the Shelf Books this Saturday morning. And to our listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you. As I always tell you, you are just absolutely fabulous. You are amazing. You're awesome, and I encourage you to go out and create a wonderful day for yourself. Polly, I'll shoot you a link to the show when it finishes streaming. Please set your calendar. Saturday mornings, 11 a.m., you're going to catch Off the Shelf Books to enjoy another fabulous author. Thank you all so very much. Bye for now.